Hi everyone, tarekith here, and today I'm going to be doing the full review of the Roland MC-707, finally. I've done 3 or 4 other shorter videos so far. I've covered specific functionality, but today I'm going to go over the whole unit, and tell you what I like, what I don't like, what I think could be improved, that sort of thing. There's a lot to cover. My apologies if I miss anything. Some of the functionality of the 707 is just things I don't need in my own music making, so I haven't used them very much, I admit. But anyway, there's a lot to talk about, so let's not waste any more time and let's dive in on the front panel. Thanks. Okay, so here we are on the front panel, zoomed in a bit so we can see what we're talking about. The hardware itself, I actually really like. It feels like it's made really well. It feels solid. It is entirely plastic. That was a little weird at first, and I felt the same way about the TR8S, but I got used to it, and I actually like the fact it's a bit lighter weight while still feeling pretty solid. It does lay totally flat. There's no way to angle it, so usually when I'm working on it, I have little feet I put on the back to kind of raise it up some. Not a huge deal, but something I would point out. Some people like to kind of an angled work surface. In terms of connectivity, there's a lot on here. We've got the 2 stereo outputs. There's 2 assignable outputs. You have a stereo send and return for adding effects loops. So if you want to do like your own custom effects pedals or send to like a modular processing rack, things like that, you can do it. And there's a good bit of flexibility about where in the signal path that happens. There's also a stereo input that can be line or mic level. That's pretty convenient. You can run that separate from all the 8 tracks. You can have like an input going on as like a 9th track if you wanted to, if you had like backing tracks or things like that. There's an SD card. It comes with an 8 GB SD card installed. Everything you do gets saved to the SD card. It's important to remember that. So if you format the SD card, you will lose whatever is on there, including all your projects. In terms of like the project structure on the card, an entire project takes up about 8 megabytes, regardless of if you have any samples on it or any clips assigned, synths, things like that. It's just kind of the standard size for anything you're backing up. If you import your own samples, then those get saved into the project folder as well. And from what I understand, you can't actually extract those once you do that. And the same goes for the loops. They're actually part of the project folder and not something that you can get out after the fact, which I know some people are upset about. One final thing about the SD card, the speed's actually pretty decent, so I didn't really feel like I needed to update it to something a little faster. There still is some slowness with the OS because of that, which I'll show you here in a little bit, but overall, it's nice they gave you a card, and they gave us a pretty good card as well. There's also the on-off switch. I've said in the past, I just feel like this is really cheap. It's just kind of flimsy. And just a little rocker slide switch. It just, I don't know. For the price of the unit, I think they could do something better. And then there's this cable lock to make sure you don't pull out the power supply. It is an external wall wart power supply. It's nice they gave us this. The placement of it's kind of weird. It kind of blocks the power switch any way that is feasible for hooking this up. It's nice, not a huge deal, but I wish there was like a better way they'd come up with for that. In terms of the actual controls themselves, the knobs are nice. They're really solid. They have a good bit of resistance. They don't turn super easily. I like this for live performance. They feel smooth. They're actually really nice. They got a nice rubberized coating on them. Same with the faders. The faders are the same way. There's a nice bit of resistance to it. They feel solid. It's all plastic, but it doesn't really feel that cheap. These buttons here are good. They're quiet. They're soft. The lights on these are pretty bright. You can change that in the OS as well if you want these brighter or dimmer, both the on state and the off state. In terms of all the colors on you, actually, you can customize quite a bit on this. Each channel can have its own color for the fader strip here. It's unfortunate we can't color like the select button for each one or this progress meter for each track too, but that's okay. In terms of other colors, what you can do, if you have like note mode, let's see if we go like a piano keyboard, you can change the color of these keys. There's octave plus and minus. You can change the color of the octave button. So I've got mine set to purple here, as you can see. You can also change the color of clips, which clips are playing, which clips are queued up, waiting to be played. Unfortunately, you can't change individual colors of like scenes. Like if a clip is playing, it's always green no matter what scene or which clip it is. Not a huge deal, but I'd like to see the ability to go ahead and like set every scene here on the display to be a different pad color, just so I know where I'm at within the set. Minor point though. And same with the mutes, the mute page. You can change the color of the mute buttons to whatever you want. There's about I think like 14 or 16 different color choices. So all in all, you really can't complain. There's a lot of customization with the colors, which is good. I'm a very visual person with my music. As you can see, I like cool colors. I don't like reds, yellows, orange, things like that. So it's good to have that amount of control. This start stop button is the same as the chiclet for the step sequencer on the TR8S. It's pretty solid. It's kind of an interesting like clear plastic, but it works good. The knobs over here are endless encoders with push button functionality. These are a little looser feeling, and they have like a little indents as you turn them, but overall I really don't have a complaint about those. Let's talk about the pads really quick. A lot of people are curious about the pads. Personally, I find the pads to be a little on the stiff side. You have to hit them kind of hard to get the full velocity range out of things. They do give you different setup options in the global menu for setting up the pad sensitivity. There's different velocity response curves. You have logarithmic, exponential, linear, plus sensitivity. There's a function in there. There's a setting in there. So like if you're getting like false triggering because you're on like a loud sound stage, you can actually decrease the sensitivity for like the on-off presses, so it's not actually accidentally triggering your sounds unintentionally. But yeah, the pads themselves, I mean, they are a little stiff. It's not hard to get like a full quiet to loud velocity response out of them. You just have to hit it quite hard to get that full velocity response. So that's really my only complaint about the pads themselves. I think they're a good size. Like they feel like they're good quality. It's like I said, they are expressive. It's just you have to be very firm-handed to get that full expressiveness. I will say though that once you kind of dive into like the Synth Engine and start fine-tuning the velocity settings as part of the synth patch, you can get quite a bit more sensitivity feeling to these. You don't hit them quite as hard, but as it's set up stock and even with the global tweaks, you still have to be quite firm when hitting these if you want to get the loudest hits. So it's not a huge deal. It hasn't really bothered me. It's better than a lot of gear I've mentioned before. It's better than like say the Novation Circuit or the Korg Electribe 2. It's not quite on par with say Push 2 or the latest batches of Machine. Those are definitely far more responsive and sensitive feeling than this is, but it's still pretty nice. It works. I'm glad they went with this style of keyboard instead of like the old school chiclets. It's multifunctional. It works really good. So yeah, that's it about the hardware. Let's talk about the kind of the organization of things. And here on the 707, as you can see, you have 8 tracks, and they're shown here on the display vertically. Each track can be anything you want. You don't have to like follow any sort of layout. You have 3 different options when it comes to, actually 4 different options, excuse me, when it comes to what the tracks can be. The first one is going to be like a drum track, a standard drum track. You get 16 pads that you can assign any sample to or any of those default sounds in memory. The second option is a drum machine with a built-in compressor attached to it, and this is a 6-channel compressor. You can only have one of these on a track in a single project, but basically there's 6 separate compressors that you can assign all the different drum sounds to within a kit. So if you want a snare to one compressor, a kick to another compressor, and so on, up to 6 different compressors. It's really useful. It's kind of a clean compressor. It's not something you're going to go for color, but if you're trying to tame dynamics, it's definitely good to make sure you put one of those in your set early on. The other options for tracks are tone tracks, which are basically synth tracks. I have mine set up with the first 3 tracks as drums, and then the last 5 are tone tracks. And then the final option, you can make a track as a looper track. The looper is a little controversial right now because it doesn't have a lot of memory. There's only 60 megabytes dedicated just to the looper. This is completely separate from the 6 minutes of mono samples you can load into the Synth Engine and onto the drum tracks. So the looper is separate memory. It's only 60 seconds. I've noticed like an 8-bar patterns at a decent tempo. That gives me like 4, maybe 5 loops I can use like on the fly before I run out of memory. It also means you can't load that much. Like if you wanted to have like a bunch of, use this like as an Ableton style clip launcher, you couldn't load a bunch of loops in. Unfortunately, it's just how it is. It's 60 seconds. I tend to think of it more like a guitar looper, something I put like the end of the signal path. With the looper, the inputs for the looper, you can choose to the record source. It's going to be external from the external inputs. You can record from the PC over USB. You can record individual tracks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 through 8, and then you can record the mix out, which is usually what I do, and that happens like post everything. You can just grab a bounce of a stereo recording of what's happening coming out of the 1/4-inch outputs. So it's nice if you wanted to loop something and then switch scenes up and whatnot, have that loop going in the background. So anyways, that kind of looper, I find it's really good. One of the downsides to these is basically if you want to change a track type, see this last one I've got as a tone track, you can see it says 8T. If I want to actually make a looper track instead, I actually have to delete the entire track to do that. So I hit delete. Are you sure? Yes. Now it's basically deleted not only the track type, but all the clips I had in there. So just something you need to keep in mind. Once you create a track, like you're probably going to be stuck with it for a while. So choose wisely. And then to create a new one here, let's just hit create, and then here's the different options I mentioned before: the tone track, the drum plus the compressor, and a looper. Um, and you can do up to a separate looper on every single track if you want as well. So you could do 8 tracks of looping, provided you don't go over the 60-second limit. So that's the basic overview here of like kind of like how things are organized on the 808. I'm sorry, the 707. As you can see, there's kind of a global clip launch scene here, kind of like it's very similar to Ableton. There are 16 different rows you can have, each with 8 clips in each one. Unlike Ableton, where you can only launch like a whole scene. If you see, I kind of scrolled over with the arrow buttons all the way to the right of the scenes, and there's like a little arrow there. That's how you can select like an entire row to launch. But unlike Ableton, which works like this, you can actually assign clips from different rows to a single scene. So if I wanted like the drums from scene 1 and the bass line from scene 5, like I could do that and assign it all to one scene. So there's a good bit of flexibility there. Let's keep going on to this. So let's talk about the drum tracks first, since that's the kind of the first thing I have set up here. To edit a sound, you hold shift and press sound. And by sound, they basically mean like either the drum machine or the synthesis engine. You can see a kind of like a top level view here. We got all 16 pads laid out. Roland's really good about kind of separating out like the editing functionality within a drum kit and within the sound engine itself for the synthesis. And there's basically 2 hierarchies to how you edit sounds. There's this kind of global hierarchy. So right now I've got this first pad selected, and as I play pads, it selects new ones. And at the bottom here, you'll see 4 parameters. Level, course tune, release timing, and reverb amount. If I press function, it shows me 4 more. So you've got fine tune, pan, envelope mode. You can sustain or not sustain it for like drum hits, and the delay send. And this is the same for the synth engine, which I'll show you here in a few minutes. So it's nice because for a lot of the common parameters that you want to tweak, if you want to just like, well, you want to pitch the kick up really high, you can do that really quickly without having to get too deep into the editing structure of the synth engine. There's also kind of a global kit option here as well. The settings, there's the global settings is for the level for the whole kit, panning. You have to have the delay and reverb set up globally before you can assign them on a per pad basis. So when I first got this, I was turning up the reverb send for a pad, not hearing anything. That's because the kit reverb send was down all the way. So just something I'll point out really quick there. You can name your kits, which is nice. You can't actually save presets per se on the 707, but the actual sound and the MIDI data in the clip are saved as one entity called a clip. So if you wanted to, you could have like a project with nothing but like your bassline clips, and a project with nothing but your lead clips or drum clips, things like that. And when you go to load kits or sounds or tones, you can load them from other projects as well, which is why that works. You don't have to only load from the factory menu. You can go into your previous projects to get sounds and or just the MIDI data. If you like the sequence you used on a lead, want to reuse that on a new lead, you can do that in a 707. You can import just the actual sound settings or the MIDI data, or both. But let's say we want to dive in more and get a little deeper editing on this kick, for instance. So I'll select the pad and then hit enter. We've got an instrument select. This is how you choose. Let's see. This is how you choose which sounds you want to assign to the pad. You can load from the preset instruments. This is basically the built-in library. You can load from another project like I was just talking about. And you can load a WAV file from the SD card. One note about the SD card, all samples are stored in a folder just called samples. You can't do like internal folders or anything like that. Like every sample you want to use on here has to be within that single folder. So it can be kind of confusing to look for things. You have to scroll through a long list to find samples. I wouldn't put like thousands of drum samples on here. I would just load a select few that you know you're going to use. Otherwise, there will be a lot of scrolling involved. Hopefully, Roland can kind of fix this. So that's how you select a sound for the individual drum pads. There's also an instrument edit screen. This is where we kind of go down the rabbit hole. This is where you can select what the different categories are. You can do all kinds of things. Tuning per pad. You can actually have 4 different WAV files or drum samples loaded per pad. And you can do things like velocity switching. So you can have like harder samples, the harder you hit. There's also a way to set up kind of random sample switching that way. So every time you hit the pad, you could have like a different symbol triggered. So this is really useful. You can load your own samples and layer them with like the built-in sounds if you want. And again, you can have 4 of those per pad. There's also a filter per pad. Pretty good options here, a few different low-pass types, the usual stuff, resonance, stuff like that. You got your pitch envelope, filter envelope, amplitude envelope as well. In addition, if we go back out here to pad edit, that's kind of the drum engine settings, and this is the actual settings kind of like one level above that for the pad itself. There's an EQ per pad, which is really, really handy. So you can actually fine tune sounds if you get things that are too boomy. And then you have more control over the EQ settings as well as some of the other stuff like cutoff and resonance offset and whatnot like that. So it lets you kind of fine tune things from the control setting without having to go too deep into the actual drum engine menu if you don't want to. So yeah, there's an EQ per pad, there's an EQ per kit. Basically, there's a lot of EQs in this device, which I really like. Each sound has an EQ, which I'll show you here in a second. Each track has an EQ. There's a global 5-band EQ on master output, where the middle 3 bands are fully parametric. So there's a lot of ways to really kind of fine tune the mix and the sound of things for a Groovebox. And in my last set, I pretty much used every EQ there was on this and didn't run into too many issues as far as like run out of processing power. So this thing feels pretty snappy right up until you get to the limits of polyphony. Let's kind of switch gears here and talk about the Synth Engine. So I'm going to select a tone track and then go into the Synth Engine. Again, I press hold shift and press sound to get in here. Just like the drums, the drum editing, there's also kind of like a global hierarchy for the Synth Engine as well. There's this nice graphic display here. Again, there's 8 parameters displayed at once for the most part. Just hit function to see the second set. So every single one of these blocks here in this display has 8 parameters you can control. There's also a lot deeper editing, which I'll talk about here in a second. The basic structure of the Roland Synth Engine, you basically get 4 partials. There's basically 4 different oscillators. There's a bunch of different options as far as oscillator types. If you select one of these blocks and press enter, you can see all of them. You have PCM waveforms, you got virtual analog, a couple different forms of virtual analog. PCM sync, there's a super saw, you can do some frequency modulation. You can also, if you want, with the PCM type, you can load your own samples into the Synth Engine. So to edit basically these partials, you press a button to select which partial will be active for editing. And then when you turn the knob, you see like right now only button 1 is selected. You can turn things on or off to select to scroll the data for multiple partials at once. But what I was saying with the PCM is you can load your own user samples and layer those with, say, the Roland Super Saw all within one patch if you want. Super flexible right there. I actually like this kind of overall like hierarchy, the synth engine. I use the arrow keys, and it's really fast to move around because you can press 2 at once to jump up and down and scroll around. Another shortcut that works almost system-wide with the 707s, if you hold shift and press an arrow key, it jumps from one side of the screen to the other. So that's a really quick way to go from like the mixer settings down to the control settings. One of the other things I really like about this is that like you can access a lot of information really quickly without having to scroll through long lists unless you really want to. If you really want to get deeper into it and go through every single little fine-tuning parameter, you can actually do a lot of sound design just from like this kind of like matrix here they show you. You can get to your LFOs, get to each partial, you change the filter type, your amplitude. There's the EQ per synth patch, which I was talking about. There's also your effects. There are a lot of effects in here. I think there's like 80 or 90 effects. I think a lot of them sound wonderful. They're really, really good from some of Roland's flagship rack mount units, as well as some of their guitar processing. So there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to effects in this device. The master effects as well. You've got a master reverb, a master delay, plus a master multi-effect. In addition to that, I mentioned there's a global master EQ plus a master multiband compressor. All of these can be active at any one time. You're not limited by processing power for the most part. The other thing I kind of like about this, the way they've set up the screen is I call it persistent menus. So I'm on track 4 right now, and I'm on the mix parameter. Say I want to do the same thing for track 5. I can just press the track select buttons, and it doesn't. Well, I switched to looper track, so that time it dumped me out. But it'll stay on the correct screen as long as I stay within the right track. So you know, if I can jump around and change like all the volumes for these synth sounds without having to go back and select synth edit mode for every single one at a time. So, and this is, you'll see this a lot in the 707 in different menu screens. Like say the knob assign button, you can control what parameters are assigned to these 3 knobs. And I can just press the track select button to scroll through all the different tracks at once without actually leaving that screen. And again, I jumped out. The looper track's kind of a special case track, so it doesn't have like these assignable parameters. You're just stuck with the reverse and pitch. You can't do filters and things like that on the looper track. So anyway, it's back to the synth editing. There's a ton of options here. most of the default presets only use 2 oscillators, 2 partials basically. You select a block, like I said, and press enter to go deep dive in it. You can see what the actual assignments are. There's a ton of PCM waveforms in here. 963 to choose from. There's different VA types. One of the things I kind of don't like about the 707, I'll be honest, is like this editing screen when you get deeper in here. Like you use the arrow keys to kind of scroll across the different options here. But the actual values for each partial are shown with these little kind of bar graphs. It's okay, kind of roughly showing you how you're editing your sounds without having to rely on like scrolling menus too much. But at the same time, like with the display this small and font that small, I mean, it does get a little tedious to try to edit things. And there is a lot of sideways scrolling trying to get like all the different parameters. Like here's a major synth edit parameters you can get to, and you can just see there's for every single one of these like upper rows, like matrix control, you've got a bunch of parameters on the lower row to scroll through as well. So there's a lot of options here as far as like designing your sounds if you really want to like fine tune things. Personally, I just tend to go through the stock presets and then stay within this like kind of global synth view to edit things. And I have not really run out of ideas that way. It's easy enough to jump in if I want to just fine tune one thing really quick and then jump back out to this main screen. So I think Roland did a really good job at kind of keeping it really accessible and quick to do the synth tweaking you want to do. It's not something you're probably going to rely on live too much. For that, you're going to want to assign parameters to these knobs so you don't have to go into this menu every time. I did mention you can change the knob assignments. They have a dedicated button for that. So each one of these 3 knobs can be different things. At first, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of options. Level, of course, you know, panning, cutoff, resonance, attack, decay, release, and then basically your effect sends some parameters from whatever effect is assigned on a per pad basis or a per track basis. But there is kind of a cheat here. Every single one of these knobs can be assigned system control 1, 2, or 3. Or 4. There's actually 4 like kind of global macro controls, and those can be sources in the mod matrix for every synth engine. So you could assign, say, a knob to sys control 1, and then in the mod matrix for that patch, you could assign sys control 1 to control, you know, quite a lot of different parameters, doing like sort of macro controls at that point. So there is a little more flexibility than it looks like at first. With that, you can assign each of these system control options as a mod matrix source. This is also really handy, this kind of knob assign button for like when I'm playing live. Like oftentimes, like I want to be tweak like the reverb send and like the delay send for a part. And so it's easy enough to kind of go in here and change that like on the fly without having to, you know, dive into too many menus. It's just one button press is knob assign. Let's talk about sequencing a little bit. The sequencing options on the Roland MC-707 are some of the best that I've used on a Roland device. I really like it. Every single one of these clips can be up to 8 bars long. You change it over here by holding shift and go to measure edit. You can change the step length to 128. There's only, if you look over here at the measure button, there's only 4 LEDs showing you the status of where you are within the measure. The flashing LED is the current location, as you can tell. But you'll see this is actually an 8-bar measure. The first LED here, this first arrow button is lit, showing me it's the first 4 measures. And then if I scroll over, the second button will light up, showing me it's the last 4 measures. So that's how you get to see all 8 measures with only 4 LEDs to show you where you are. In addition to knowing where you are within a measure, there's this progress LEDs at the top of every track. This shows you the progress of whatever clip is currently playing on a track. You can see them slowly get brighter and brighter as the track progresses. Some of these tracks, like track 4 here, are shorter. It's only 1 bar. I find that's really useful being in a set. I can see like when a track is going to end, when a clip is going to end. If you change clips, they always change at the end of the current pattern, not at the end of the scene. So if like all of your clips in a row are 8 bars and you select another clip, it'll change right at the next pattern at a boundary. It won't wait till the end of those 8 patterns. So something to be aware of. Also at the bottom of each track here on the display, there's a little LED meter. So we actually get some kind of visual representation of like our signal level for each track. They're tiny, it's not really accurate, but it's better than most Grooveboxes these days. Sadly, there's no visual representation of like gain reduction like on the compressors. Like I mentioned, there's a global 3-band compressor on the master output. It's all by ear. You can't see actually how much gain reduction you're dialing as you change the threshold, but oh well, it'd be nice, but as of right now, that's not in there. Again, let's kind of talk about the sequencer stuff. So on you have basically, here's how you access your scenes. There's 8 scenes. You have the first 4 visible at once, and you can hold shift to launch the next 4. Again, scenes can be clips from any row. When it comes to clip setup, I should have mentioned this before. There's two options for your clips basically on a per track basis. You can have all of the clips on a track play one sound basically. So if you have like a synth patch, you could have all 16 clips on that track just playing that synth patch, that specific synth patch. Or you can set it up with what they call clip mode, where every single one of these clips in here is not only its own sequence, but it also has its own sound assigned to it, and knob settings. The knob settings change per clip too. So that way it's kind of more like an Ableton style clip launcher where every single clip can be its own separate sound and you can switch among them on the fly. In my experience, it's totally seamless. There's no issues with like sound dropping out when you do it. The timing stays great. There's even like notes, the delay and release tails hold over from one clip to another, which is super nice. Quite a bit different than say some of the stuff that happens on the Korg devices. In addition, you can record motion sequences, so it's not just in your MIDI data. You can also record the knob tweaking. You can only record these 3 knobs per track. You can't record any of the master effects or any of the other synth parameters unless you assign them to a knob. Motion recording is on or off, so you could have a bunch of recorded automation, leave it off until you want to like hit that like with the crowd at once and turn motion sequencing on. So in a way, you could assign like motion sequencing to different parameter values and kind of store that, so you could do like even greater scene recall, if that makes sense. It's really easy to record motion sequences. All you do is press the record button. Editing motion sequences is pretty simple as well. If you just hold down a step button, you'll see first of all which notes are assigned to that button. This is a synth track, so I've got 2 notes assigned there. If I hold function and turn a knob, I can change like all the different notes on that step at once, or I can just select which note I want to change, say the length for. I want to do the second note, the C4, and then the D sharp 4 I'll make really short, that sort of thing. If you want to edit the motion though, you see up here note is selected. It's kind of highlighted. A little hard to see with that white on sort of white background, but if I go over to the motion, then I can see what the motion data is recorded on each track as well. Let's get back to that. So you can see I've got a filter recording here of 36 for that step. The next step is 58, etc. So you can do that for all 3 knobs. You can change the actual values assigned to them. One thing to note when you do change a motion or record motion sequences, it's not like a parameter lock like Electron uses. So it doesn't change just for that step and go back to its stored value. That basically says at this step, change values, and it will stay at that value until you change it back with another step. So just something to be aware of if you're tweaking your settings and it doesn't sound right. You might have to go back to the very first step in the pattern and set it back to the default value of whatever that knob was. And that's easy to see too, what the default value was. You just hold shift and turn a knob and you'll see what the stored value was for that knob without actually changing it, which is nice. So if you made a tweak and you don't like the way it sounds, it's easy enough to see what the original value was and go back to it. One thing you can't do though is like say go back to all your values for all clips or all scenes at once. Like say on the Electron boxes, there's a functionality called kit reload. You can go crazy tweaking everything and then it's a single button combo that just slams everything back to the save state. It's great for doing really dramatic buildups. I'd love to see that on the 707, either on a per clip basis or on a per scene basis. Being able to like just press a button combination, have like all the saved data come back up all at once. You can reload clips one by one, but it's kind of a slow, tedious process and not something you really want to use as like a performance tool. Quantize. You can quantize everything you record or not. You hold the quantize button down. You can choose to turn on input quantizers for every single track on a per track basis. There's a master quantize, so if you want to always have everything set up to 16th notes, you can do that. You can also quantize on a clip by clip basis. So you can, if you've done a bass line just a little bit loose, you can tighten it up a little bit with this. It's really nice. I really find that functionality useful. Some tracks I want to have a little bit more swing to them than other ones. Speaking of swing and clips and settings and stuff like that, as you can see over here on the side, this is how we edit all that kind of stuff. Right now I've got the track selected, the header is selected, so I can change the sound assigned to that track since that's not in clip mode. I can go into the clip settings for that track. This is where I change like the sound source from clip to track based. You can copy and paste clips, which is really nice. You can rename clips and you can delete clips all from this setting. Sorry, that's tracks. You can copy and paste tracks. I'm going to go now into the clip page. You can see these are the clip settings. So you can choose which Sorry, I keep doing so. I'm using arrows here. You have to use the knob to select it. You can choose which sound is assigned to a clip. There's different clip settings as well. Shuffle is done in this menu, as well as you can transpose per clip. You can change the scale of each clip. So if you want to make it finer or greater resolution, you can also do forward and backward playback, as well as like ping pong, forward and backward. You can reverse it. You can do random playback. So there's quite a bit of functionality as far as like how clips play back, and it's pretty easy to access this per clip while you're playing live if you want to get kind of crazy. As I mentioned, you can copy and paste clips. You not only have to copy and paste the sound and the MIDI data, like I mentioned, you can do either or. If you want just the sound from a clip, you can do that. You can name clips. You can reload clips. This is where you do it. Like I said, it's kind of slow. And you can also delete clips. So there's a lot of ways you can kind of set up everything in advance so that when you go to perform with this, everything is ready to go. You can see, like, for me, like, I've named all my clips. You see the name down here. It's small, but it's useful when I'm jumping around a set to kind of glance at the display and see like where I am, what kind of track am I? Am I on a synth track? Am I on a lead track, a bass track, things like that? I'm sorry, clip. And I can also do it with the track. You can rename the tracks as well. So I've got a kick snare track, a percussion track, a cymbals track, etc. So in addition to the colors I showed you earlier, having like this amount of functionality where you can like really name things and define how you want them to look makes it really, really fun to perform with the 707. Yeah. Let's see what else. We've got these pad modes down here. These are what these 16 pads control. I use note mode a lot. Octaves up here. If you want to input a note on a step, basically just hold a step and press the pad. You can do multiple pads. You can tie a pad. Once you've edited that, you can change the length of the note you've recorded to start point. So if you want to like make it faster or slower from like right on the beat, you can do that. You can change the velocity. You can even edit the notes and delete notes, things like that. So the sequencer is pretty easy to use, and note mode works really, really well with this. There's also the clip mode that I mentioned before. This is kind of like for Ableton style, Launchpad style clip launching. You can see right here in the screen, like this top button of the sequencer buttons, this scrolls up and down in the list. So right now I have, let's go over here. I'm selecting a scene. So once this row of clips here starts playing, they turn green. The ones that aren't playing below them are yellow if I want to mix it up. You can scroll up and down the rows I was trying to show you before with these buttons here. So you can see, you don't really have to look at the display too much. You can just use these buttons to see where you are within the set. This is scene, the top scene, this is the bottom scene. There's also a mute mode, which is really handy. The mute settings are kind of interesting. I like this screen a lot. Basically, mute on the bottom row, these orange pads, and again, you can change this color if you don't like orange, but these orange pads actually silence the track. It's like an audio mute. The top row actually lets you stop the clip playback specifically, though, for whatever's playing on a track. So not only can I mute the audio from that track, I could instead just stop the clip from playing back. So if I had like a long delay tail, I could keep that going without actually just muting it all at once, like what would happen with the audio mute. So that makes the mute functionality a little bit more useful. You can also hold mute and just press the track select buttons to mute things. So if you're not wanting to be in the mute menu for any reason, say you're editing a synth parameter and want to mute something really fast, you can just hold mute and do that. Likewise, if you're in the drum mode, the drum kit mode, if you hold down the track select button, you can mute individual drum pads this way. There's no way to kind of unmute all of them at once, unfortunately, but and likewise, there's no solo functionality on the 707 either, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is what it is, as I said before. In addition, you also have a chord mode for these pads. I don't really use that too much, to be honest, but it's nice to have that there. You can define your own chords, or you can use some of the pre-built ones, which sound just like basic triads for the most part. There's also the roll and scatter functionality, which has been around on the ARIA devices for a while. It's a lot more customizable on the 707 than, say, the TR-8S. You can choose which tracks actually get affected by it, which don't. There's 2 separate multi-effects processors. Excuse me. just for the scatter functionality. So you can do things like set up delay and reverb sends just with the scatter. You can do playback speed. You can do all kinds of weird things. I'll be honest, the manual section for the scatter editing is the worst part of the whole manual, at least for me. Like, I find it really unintuitive and hard to follow. So I have to sit down one of these days and really kind of dive into it. But there's a lot of functionality with scatter. It doesn't have to be quite as over the top as it was on the TR-8S. Let's see, let me get some stuff here. Some of them are over the top still. There's another kind of neat little feature is that when you're in the scatter mode, you can actually assign one of these scatter effects to like kind of its own sequencer. So if I hold a button down, so now when I actually press and hold the scatter button, it'll actually play that sequence scatter, those sequence scatter effects. And of course that can get saved with the project as well. So again, these kind of the built-in scatter effects are still, for the most part, over the top and really kind of digital sounding. In most styles of music, it's not something I would do. It'd be kind of jarring, but there is the ability to go in there and really fine-tune the scatter things to only affect certain tracks, to only do certain things. You can assign, everything to different multi-effects, like I said. But I did find that for the most part, that part of the manual is really just incomprehensible. It was really difficult to figure out exactly what they're talking about. Kind of briefly talking about the manual, in general, it's okay. It's not the best written. It's very dry. It basically, in a lot of places, it's just a list of all the different parameters. It doesn't really tell you what they do. And there's a few different typos, not so much typos, but miswordings carried over from some of the other synths, like they just cut and paste some of the information. A lot of times they refer to this global delay effect as a global chorus effect, like it is on, I think, maybe the Phantom. There are chorus effects within the delay category here, but in the manual it can be confusing if you're talking about looking for like a global chorus and you can't find it. That's what they're referring to. Let's see, this is global. There's a couple different chorus effects in there. That's what I'm talking about there. So yeah, the manual's okay. There's two manuals. There's a kind of an operation guide and then a reference manual. The reference manual has all the goods. The operation guide's kind of a quick start. Even that's a little hard to follow along with in parts, but I say stick with it. Watch some tutorial videos online. I've got some myself, little plug. But overall, it's actually really, really intuitive use, like once you kind of get a handle on the overall structure. So yeah, so that's basically a quick overview of the MC-707. Like I said, there's a lot of things to cover here. We jumped around quite a bit. If there's anything I missed, you have any questions on, let me know in the comments and I'll try to clarify. And I also want to kind of reiterate that I did do some other videos on more specific functionality of the 707, and I plan to do some more of those as well. I have one coming up probably on like the sample and looping functionality that will go into more depth than I have today. So let's kind of take a step back now and talk about, like, broadly, what do I like, what don't I like, what's working for me and what's not. Okay, so hopefully that was a good overview of everything that the 707 can do. What do I think about it? What are my thoughts on the 707? I've had it for about a month now. I've just recorded a live set that I posted on YouTube that turned out a lot better than I hoped for. There's always a fear when you wait for something for so long. For years I'd hoped Roland would make another Groovebox, and there's always kind of a fear that once it finally arrives, you'll have overhyped it so much in your head that it'll never live up to your expectations. The 707 really hasn't done that for me, though. I've actually been pleasantly surprised at how far Roland has come with their Groovebox design. There's a lot of really, really good ideas in here that I think you just don't see in other Grooveboxes. I like the 8-track layout. It's perfect for the way I like to perform my music. I like the fact that all the tracks are freely assignable. The fact that it has a clip mode that allows seamless clip launching. That's been great. It's kind of unique for a Groovebox that's kind of synth-based like that. Really easy to use. The layout of the hardware itself, I think, is really well done. You've got, kind of like I said before, you've got your sequencer set up, your main performance area, your synth and clip set up, and then your pad mode buttons all kind of laid out logically. The feel of the hardware is good. It is plastic, but I've kind of come to not really mind that so much. It still feels solid. It's not as heavy as the old Grooveboxes were. The sound quality is great. I have no problems about that. The drum sounds and synth sounds are really, really good. I think some of the stock drum kits are a little blah overall. I don't know, not my thing, but luckily it's easy enough to use your own. I think if you approach it the right way, as a sample playback device, the 707 is pretty strong too. In fact, you can use a blend of the built-in drum samples plus your own drum samples, and actually layer those up per pad is great. The same thing goes with the Synth Engine. You can use, any one of the myriad of synthesis options in there on one partial, and then load your own sample on another partial and play that all from the keyboard. So I think that's really, really good. Obviously, there's some limitations there. You have about, 600 seconds of mono sampling and 300 seconds of stereo sampling. For me, that's more than enough. I don't really have a problem with that. The looper having only 60 seconds memory separate from the other memory is okay for me as well. It's a shame that there isn't more there. It'd be nice. I could see where people want to load like a lot of different loops up. For me, I think the looper more like a guitar pedal looper anyway, which I think I hinted at before. Just something to kind of go at the end of the signal chain. I can just loop and capture like on the fly, something I'm not going to probably do too often. It's a nice functionality. It's not as full-fledged as it could be. We'll see, maybe Roland kind of fleshes that out a little more if we're lucky. So overall, I really like the MC-707 quite a bit. I've bonded with it a lot more than I thought I would. It definitely was a bit of a struggle at first. The manual's not that great. It took a few read-throughs and just kind of playing around, but after a little while, it all kind of clicked, and then I found it really, really intuitive to use. Even some of the deeper diving on the Synth Engine can be a little cumbersome with the tiny display, but it's not that hard to figure out overall, and it's pretty easy to find exactly what you're looking for without too much menu diving. In general, there is definitely some menu diving, and I think they can improve things, but for how much power is there in that Synth Engine, I can't really complain too much about it. Things I wish were better, different. I wish you could leave the USB cord plugged in for transferring samples back and forth to the computer. It's annoying to have to unplug that and plug it in every time you go into USB storage mode on the 707. The pads could be a little bit more responsive, a little softer. I've gotten used to them. You still have to hit them quite hard, as I've mentioned a few times now. What else? The power button has always been, the power switch, I mean, has always been kind of a bone of contention for me. It just feels really cheap and flimsy, and I'm surprised by that. There's also the no clip or scene reload functionality, like on the fly, as like a performance tool. Being able to like instantly reload an entire scene back to its save state would be really, really cool. Kind of like the kit reload on Electron boxes. Roland has never done that in any of the devices though, so that's more of a personal wish list than something I think needs to be there. But yeah, I can't say enough good things about the 707 otherwise. There's definitely a few small niggles I have with it, but most of those are kind of personal workflow related or just things that ultimately don't matter. I find it really quick to sequence things when it comes to synth tweaking. Having that kind of top hierarchy of the most common parameters makes things really simple and easy, especially with the graphic display and not having to rely on like just endless lists like the TR-8S. So I've really had a good experience using it so far. It's really quick to get my ideas down. The ones now that I know kind of the overall structure of it, I don't really find myself hunting for what I'm looking for. That's always really nice. And yeah, the overall sound quality of it's great. It's kind of amazing, I think, that we have 128 voices to play with here with that Synth Engine, those effects, and all the kind of raw drum samples that Roland's known for. It's not the ACB drums that a lot of people want, but I think the samples that they do give you are actually really, really good. And I have no problem using those for my music. So yeah, 2 thumbs up for me. I really like it. I have no plans to play with anything else right now. I just want to focus on this for a few months. Performing with it and doing like kind of continuous live sets has been a load of fun. And it wasn't something that took me a long time to get to grips with. The video I posted recently a few weeks back, my first live performance was honestly like only the second or third time I even tried kind of doing a performance with the 707. So Roland did a lot of good things with this. It's pretty forward thinking. And I think for like a modern day version of something they're known really well for, I think they've done a great job. Highly recommended, and hopefully I'll be doing some more performance videos and more in-depth tutorials as well here coming up. Any questions, as always, put them in the comments. Otherwise, I hope this was useful, and I will talk to you again soon. Thanks.